In Next Generation 911, the data that is being collected by the RPCs will be used for emergency call routing and location validation. In 2014, CSEC acquired an EGDMS, and the RPCs began a mission-critical task of preparing the GIS data for Next Gen 911. Today, the RPCs are making great strides of preparing the data and ensuring that it is accurate and complete, which will better prepare our program for NG 911. This valuable GIS data is also being requested and used by other public safety agencies.
A process that's been created that basically helps RPCs get their data cleaned up. They work independently to clean up their own data, then they upload that data into a portal where GeoCom basically takes that data and coalesces it, evaluates it, and feeds that information back to the RPCs. So that feedback loop is very critical to seeing the data get better and better over time. The nice thing about that is that not only will it is it great for the improvement of the data, but once they move into a maintenance of that data, it will also work perfectly well.
Our biggest challenge has probably been the old data, the existing data before we had standards that's in the cities. They just don't, what's out there in the real world just doesn't always follow our schema that we've developed. And so when you get to some of these subdivisions that have numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on both sides of the road, our standards are not meant to do that. So we've had to do a lot of tweaking. So the challenges of how the city's addresses, older addresses that they're not willing to change, that are possibly the wrong address and the wrong block number. So there's some real world maps out there that just doesn't follow our guidelines.
One of the biggest challenges in our COG region is in our rural jurisdictions, where many times we cannot determine who owns the property. Also in terms of the site structures with the driveways and entrance to ranches. So many times that becomes a challenge in trying to determine where those site structures are really at.
Number one is resources and planning. I think we have to have effective planning at the local government level as well as the RPC level. Too often the RPCs are assisting the local government level with planning and resources, and that takes away from the effectiveness of us being able to clean the data effectively and produce decent projects. So I think that we have to look at bandwidth and resources at both local and regional level.
Luckily in our region, we're one of the agencies that's creating and maintaining that for a majority, but then you have smaller cities where address points have never been maintained or created in a digital format. So that certainly is a barrier for us. So we need to make sure that across the state, everyone is able to get the same level of data completeness.
If we have incorrect data, it could mean that, the emergency responders get an incorrect address or incorrect location, and so it's going to slow down response times. That's why it's so important to work on the database, so we have good data in there, and when it translates to a 911 call, we are able to reach the people that are calling immediately.
The routing in Next Generation 911 will be based on the map. And so it's going to rely on those polygons that we built, those routing tables that are built, and to route the 911 call to the correct PSAP and to get the right emergency responders. So we'll be totally dependent on it. So that's why it's worth our effort to building all this accuracy that we're doing now with the EGDMS project.
Their GIS data has improved greatly since then, and just as an example of that, when we first started out in September 2014, the average error fallout that was associated with each RPC. Again, this is an average. There were some that were better and there were some that were not so good, but the average was 130,000 errors per RPC. Today, the error fallout is roughly around 28,000 per RPC. That is, if you carry that out over all the RPCs, that is basically 2.2 million errors that have been corrected since the beginning of the EGDMS.
One of the things, key point is actually sharing this data and having state and federal agencies also be able to have access to the data. Obviously, again, in terms of a disaster, you know, in our COG region, we're limited in terms of specialized teams. So we do need to have state and federal resources coming in. By them having access to this data, actually they know exactly where to respond, how to respond, and, you know, just basically know the geographic area of that disaster.
Texas is the model, and so when you talk about getting information from 911, how helpful is it? It's actually a keystone of the entire project, because as we spoke earlier, when a flood occurs, if it occurs out in an open field and nobody's affected, that's not an issue compared to populations and neighborhoods being flooded. And so the key to all of this is an address point. Where are people? And so we can accurately depict where people live and where infrastructure is by using address points. So that data is so important to correctly articulating the risk. Who's in the way of this flood? Lay the address points on the map, now you know.
There are some really great ancillary benefits that we've seen through having better GIS data. We have better PSAP maps, we have better mobile maps for the first responders. Also, we see agencies like Tenorus possibly being able to use this data. EOCs could use this data. And also, recently, in the last year or so, the University of Texas needed some address points for some floodplain modeling that they were doing. And so now, with that type of research, we can respond to floods quicker, we can evacuate people faster, and we have more information.
Depending on the agency and depending on the need, it could be very important. I think that third parties are good for certain things, but they're not the authoritative source of the GIS data. So we really should assume that our cities and counties are the best source for data, and we should make sure that process and the data itself is actually streamlined. And beyond that, I think that we can work together with third parties and other state agencies to make this a more effective data sharing mechanism.
We are investing so many resources into this data, and if it can be used for more than one agency, I think that's definitely a positive. I think that's more effective to use the resources that way. So definitely, as the 911 authority, I think that we are in the best position to create that data, and so that's the data that I would want to have other agencies use.
Every season, the CSEC has a huge head start on many other regions and states. We've actually seen some statewide next generation 911 implementations that have been delayed because of GIS data. I think the approach that the CSEC took was really to build and update GIS data sets first, and next to take a look at next generation 911 ALI database replacements, and then after that to look at next generation 911 EZNet componentry. So what we've seen in some other states is, rather than breaking it into 3 separate projects conducted over different periods of time, we've seen other states lump it all together into one large project. And there have been some cases where they'll build out an EZNet, deploy all the EZNet functional elements for routing 911 calls, and only at that point do they learn that the GIS data sets the databases that are required for routing 911 calls aren't up to speed and are not sufficient for that task. And so in those cases, it can actually delay the rollout of a next generation 911 system.